What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another video. And Modern Horizons 3 is easily one of the most anticipated sets to come out this year, especially when it was officially announced way back when that we were going to be getting another Modern Horizons set. And unfortunately, for a lot of people like myself, there's leaks, and leaks make things very difficult because you kind of want to talk about them, and I think I've went on to just talk about them anyway, to act like if these are real, what could the impact be, things like that. And this article here written by Blake is kind of confirming a lot of what cards were actually leaked on Reddit and, from all the fuzzy, grainy pictures and everything like that. And some of the other cards that really weren't prominently featured like in those videos and like in those like very fuzzy pictures and stuff. So we're going to go look at the article. We're going to see what cards have officially been spoiled now and that are going to be in the Modern Horizons 3 set. But of course, before we get too deep into the article and we look at some cards and we kind of give our thoughts and opinions and everything like that, if you like my content and you want to see more, please consider subscribing to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. If you'd like to go even further with your support, I do have channel memberships. So if you would like to go even further, get access to some cool perks, then, consider becoming a member of the channel today. That'd be really sweet. Going forward, Modern Horizons 3 stuff looks like, I would say less likely to get leaks, or I guess if we do get leaks, that Wizards is going to kind of confirm them. So I think we're going to be getting spoilers pretty early, and we're going to get to kind of see what's going on in the set, and we already kind of have an idea of like the theme of the set based on some of the other cards that were initially spoiled for the Modern Horizons 3 set, and we're going to get a very good idea from some of these other ones. So article starts off with, much like Oko on Thunder Junction, it has been a betrayal at our vault. Modern Horizons 3, a set that is the perfect marriage of powerful magic and powerful memes, which is very true. There's a good amount of callbacks to like specific cards with some of the other cards that are printed in the set. A powerful magic and powerful memes is spilling out into the world at a quick, though unintended, clip. We think the culprit is a hidden door at the back of the Fomori vault that Jace forgot about, but only Oko knows, and he's off somewhere doing crunches. And that's just a picture of Oko. At any rate, we're here. We've experienced leaks of this magnitude in the past, and each time it gets similar feedback. That there's a significant contingent of our fans who prefer to engage with previews without the fuzzy, distorted potato camera photos getting in their way. We definitely prefer it. So the first card here is Flare of Denial, is officially confirmed. So Flare of Denial, 2 blue and a generic for an instant that counters target spell, and it has an alternative cost of getting to sacrifice a non-token blue creature rather than paying the spell's mana cost to then counter target spell. And we've talked about before, cancel with some upside, is pretty good. We see that with 3 Steps Ahead that was actually printed in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, which has been a pretty good counterspell that you can kind of play on turn 3, turn 4 if you need it. And then on later turns, it ends up getting you draw you extra cards, or it can make copies of some of your other creatures and things like that if that ends up being important. Flare Denial is definitely just a straight up counterspell with a way to cast it for free. So something that was talked about like in one of my shorts that someone actually left a comment on, which is like really nice. I really do appreciate people commenting and getting to interact with my content. That, getting to Aether Violin, just like some random blue creatures, again, something like in Merfolk, where I don't know if they would necessarily want like a counterspell that, the only alternate cost is to sacrifice a creature rather than pitching a blue card. Maybe it ends up being the same, but just getting to Aether Violin, a blue creature that maybe has like a pretty decent enter the battlefield trigger to then essentially get access to a free counterspell, which, we have cards like Force of Negation, which counters a non-creature spell and exiles it, but you have to pitch a blue card to it. We have Subtlety that gets a creature or a planeswalker spell, but if it's on like top or bottom of their library and you have to go down a blue card to be able to cast it for free. Flare Denial is kind of like, you're going down a card, but you're going down a card on like a resource that's already been played. So you get some kind of value from it. And of course we know that we're going to get another cycle of free spells one in each color that is kind of been the standard for Modern Horizons 3 sets. So I think this is the one people kind of expected for, like the original Modern Horizons, when there was like going to be a free counterspell in blue, but then we got Force Negation, which has been really nice. And Flare Denial, I'm sure is going to see some amount of play. People are going to try to abuse these with some of the other pitch elementals if possible. And this is one that you could, in theory, use with Subtlety, to try to bounce something, whatnot, or return a spell to their opponent's top or bottom of their library. So Flare Denial just kind of slots into the free spot. Again, if you get some cool like blue creatures or creatures that are blue and another color that have some very powerful end of the battlefield triggers, especially having like flash as well, this kind of gives you a way to get value from that creature and then also use it to counter a spell. But in any case, free counterspell is free counterspell, and it's going to see some amount of play at the beginning stages of Modern once Modern Horizons 3 is released. That said, we have the regular border for Flare Denial. We have the old border, which does look really sweet, and then this full art, like kind of borderless treatment, which does look pretty sweet, honestly. And it shows you what other cards are available in. So it goes on to say, that said, leaks of this magnitude we're seeing in Modern Horizons 3 are tough to ignore outright, hence this very article. So let's talk about things go from here, and yes, also show off some of the cards in non-potato camera form. So I have this recurring nightmare where I forgot to do my homework and also half the set leaked, which it was going to be kind of like some like quippy, like witty captions for a lot of these. So Chthonian Nightmare is a 2-mana enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy. You pay X energy, sacrifice a creature, return a Chthonian Nightmare to its owner's hand, and you return a creature card with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. So this is definitely a callback to the card Recurring Nightmare, which hence kind of why we have this title of I have this Recurring Nightmare. So Recurring Nightmare was like a 3-mana enchantment that you'd play it, and then I believe it was 3 mana, and then you would sacrifice a creature and then return a Recurring Nightmare to your hand, and then just return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So like you kind of see in like the pre-modern format, which is kind of like the new obsession for me, you could see people like sacrificing like Wall of Blossoms to get back things like Hermit Druid, and then you could like loop Recurring Nightmare, because it's just going to keep bouncing to your hand. It's kind of like better than most of the other Reanimator spells in that way, to where as long as you have like a creature to sacrifice to it, you're going to be able to keep bringing things back. And that's kind of like the idea is like you could sacrifice a squirrel token from Hermit Druid to bring it back and make more squirrels and then let it die and so on. So this is like definitely a callback to Recurring Nightmare, but definitely fixed and more powered down from the modern format, because now you have to use energy to end up actually getting something back, but you do get to kind of like loop this. You can net some energy, so if you have a creature you could sacrifice, maybe get a death trigger from, pay like 2 energy to get back a 2-cost creature, and then you end up netting 1 energy, so then the next time you play it, you can get a 4 or a 5, depending on what you end up getting. Will this see play? I would imagine a lot of these like callback cards are going to draw a lot of interest. Again, people really like... I don't know if people really like the card Recurring Nightmare, but I think Recurring Nightmare is kind of a nostalgic card for players. So I think Chthonian Nightmare is going to be something that sees some play initially, and we're just going to have to see if there's, if it ends up getting paired with cards that care about energy, or if it ends up being a standalone. I think the fact that it gets 3 energy on the enter, and you have a lot of powerful cards at 1, 2, and 3 mana, well, it's not nearly as exciting, getting to play, this for 2 mana and then sacrificing a creature, using up some of your energy, and then having to cast it again to bring back a 1 or a 2 drop. I think you can eventually just end up getting enough energy to where you can get back bigger things, which is definitely a way to not break this card when, things like Gristlebrand and Atraxa and cards of those nature are legal in the modern format. And it also just says, return target creature card with mana value from your... Okay, so it is from your graveyard. I think Recurring Nightmare was the same way. But, we have the original border, the regular border, the old border, and it also has its own full art, which is very creepy, but actually looks pretty badass. I like that so much. So we go on. Debut begins May 21st, an unfathomably long 3 weeks from now in internet time. We were very much looking forward to giving you all a break and just enjoying Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Players love the draft environment. The cards are impactful in multiple formats, and we still have a few cards applauded and waiting to enter the battlefield. Hey, we're the patient type. As patient as a land that gives you 2 mana on turn 1. which is Ugin's Labyrinth, which has Imprint. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile a colorless card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand. It taps to add 1 colorless mana, but if you have a card exiled with Ugin's Labyrinth, you add 2 colorless mana instead, and then you can tap it to return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So this is a land that some amount of the time is only going to tap for 1 colorless mana, but then there's going to be times where it does tap for 2 colorless mana. And you essentially have to 2-for-1 yourself in a way because you're playing the land and then you have to exile, a big card from your hand. But it does eventually give you the card back at the cost of, only tapping for 1 mana. Of course, this is something that probably slots into Tron, although a little bit worse considering that, before, if this was printed like 5-10 years ago, somewhere in that range, this would probably be a lot better just because of all like the Karn Liberateds that they play and just kind of like all these big spells that would be played, big colorless spells that the deck would play. It would definitely get a lot of use out of having 2 mana on turn 1. That said, Ugin's Labyrinth is still going to be a card that people are going to try out and play. Like Tron is definitely the immediate thought of slotting a card like this into it. Of course, we could have some other. This is actually funny enough. If you play the Leyline combo, you play like Leyline to go back on turn 1, and then you Labyrinth to exile like a Draco, you can end up playing a Scion or Draco on turn 1 with Ugin's Labyrinth. Something neat. I mean, you end up having to put the Scion or Draco underneath of the Labyrinth. Then you have the Leyline. Then you have the land. Then you have another Scion. It's like a 4-card combo, but you get like a 4/4 with like all these crazy abilities. I don't know if that's good enough in Modern with people playing like main deck Pick Your Poison and all these other like edict effects that they're playing. But nonetheless, that is something that you could technically do in the format now where you can play a Scion or Draco on turn 1. So super cool, very neat. Definitely a nice restriction to put on a land that if you want to add a land that taps for multiple colorless mana, but you don't want to reprint something like Ancient Tomb or City of Traders, then I think this card's like perfect. And the fact that it's a little less punishing because once you have enough lands in play and you don't need the extra mana, you can actually just get the exile card back to your hand. Did it really need that? No, but I think to be playable and wanted to see play, which I would imagine a lot of like the mythics and the rares, you'd want to see some amount of play in the Modern format. That's probably what you have to do to make this playable, and it's just really cool. Like, it's a really neat design for a land. Doesn't seem like it's getting any other treatment besides like this full art borderless version, which does look pretty sweet and just kind of looks like a different angle from the original one. So to that end, we want to give fans the experience they want. If you're the type who devours leaks and previews as soon as possible, the Modern Horizons 3 leaks aren't hard to find. We're not going to point you in their direction or anything, but if you're into that kind of thing, you probably already know where they are. They're in here, which is an Urza's Cave, which is a land Urza's Cave, which taps for a colorless mana, and you can pay 3 mana, tap, sacrifice Urza's Cave to search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this is probably, and we're going to have like a fight with what lands actually see play in, like Tron, maybe in something like the Titan decks and things like that, where Urza's Cave is not going to give something like Amulet Titan immediate value. You're not going to be able to untap it and generate a ton of mana if you have 2 or 3 amulets in play. But the fact that you're going to be able to sacrifice, you're going to be able to put on the battlefield tapped, like basically whatever land that the Titan deck would need, it can end up getting it and putting it into play tapped, and then thanks to Amulet, it's going to untap a bunch of times, potentially giving them enough mana. Of course, you have to invest virtually 4 mana, 3 to pay the cost, and then of course tapping the Urza's Cave, and then you have to sacrifice it as well. So, I mean, there's definitely a world that I could see where you kind of use this as, a weird, like, land tutor where you can go and get, like, Graveyard Hate. It's like another way to end up getting the land you want, and it's going to put it in play. So you're going to be able to get bounce lands with Titan. You're going to be able to get the missing Tron land that you need with Tron, or, the other Tron land that you're going to need to kind of end up casting something like an Ulamog. I just definitely see a lot of like big mana decks being able to kind of use and abuse this, or at least in some way getting colored mana if they need it. So Urza's Cave, like right off the rip, it might be fighting for like a 1-of slot in, kind of like the Tron decks, maybe in the Titan decks especially, which we've kind of seen fall off thanks to some of the other decks that we see seeing play in the format. So, Urza's Cave definitely, I think, has a home somewhere. Just not exactly sure where. I mean, you could also kind of do this in like I think the format's too fast for it, mind you. But, the fact that you can play this from like your graveyard and then just kind of leave up mana and then kind of like sacrifice it and fix your mana in some sort of way, or again, getting lands that have some pretty powerful enter the battlefield triggers, like not Dakmor Salvage, the other one, Bojuka Bog, to like exile graveyards and stuff like that. So just a nice utility land to kind of print. Of course, it's probably going to see play in a lot of like the commander formats and things like that. Moving on, if you're the type of player that enjoys the communal experience of discovering the set in an intentional way, complete with crisp, non-potato camera images, we're still going to roll that out for you in the coming weeks. We have some cool, fun things lined up, including a revamp of the classic Eldrazi-focused stories, throwback previews here on Daily MTG, revisiting some of our old column lineup, latest developments, Command Tower, Savor the Flavor, and From the Lab, and definitely a few more clever ideas that are going to come up with on the fly. Look at this card. See how clever we are? We'll come up with something. And this is White of the Reliquary. That was harder than it needed to be. So obviously, kind of a callback to Night of the Reliquary, like design and all. Because if you look at Night of the Reliquary, that's kind of how Night of the Reliquary looked. So green and a black, Vigilance 2/2 that gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and you can sacrifice another creature to search the library for a land card and put that on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. So this is basically a way to again get a little bit of value from like sacrificing your creatures and everything like that. Can't sacrifice itself to search for a land, so it doesn't get to be like delayed like 2-mana ramp or anything. But the fact that it's going to get big for each creature card in your graveyard, it's going to be able to attack and then also sacrifice another creature to end up searching your land or your library for a land, putting it on the battlefield. Now, is there any lands necessarily that are going to be like super powerful that you'd want to get them? White, in like combination with some bounce lands, way to return things. You can end up searching up something like a channel land and then playing a bounce land to get it back, and you sort of kind of ramp in a way, but then, you have access to this very powerful channel land ability. Of course, getting to search up something like, that doesn't really work. White of the Reliquary is kind of weird. Knight hasn't really been playable in a while. There used to be this kind of Knight combo deck that you'd play like Retreat to Coral Helm, and you'd have like a Knight of the Reliquary. You can make it super big, and then eventually you just kind of overrun your opponent with like a Keswick Wolf run to just end up killing them. And I believe it even like won like a tournament or two. Like it was a pretty neat deck, and it was not necessarily hard to interact with, but given the format and everything, it was just kind of like a flavor of the month sort of thing, and then it kind of fell to the wayside. So White of the Reliquary, pretty neat, a little less abusable than Knight, because Knight sacrifices lands to get land, or sacrifices like forest or plains to get lands. So, here we are. It's a pretty sweet card. Cool design. It's a zombie, if that ends up being relevant. And again, just can end up being like a big attacker, and just in general being annoying to deal with. Plus getting some death triggers and things like that. So neat card. Pretty cool callback to a very playable card. Not fully, because it's not 3 mana, it's 2 mana. But I think that's just a part of just actually trying to be a playable card in Modern, and instead of just kind of going full throwback there. So pretty neat stuff. So goes on to say, plus Modern Horizons sets are known for the fantastic limited formats, and the third round is no exception. We'll try to deliver a well-rounded look at what the limit is like for the set, context. Hint, it's wild, weird, and great. The context here is this card is a very strong uncommon, which is a spawn gain commander, which is a clear reference to siege gain commander. So it's a void, so this card has no color, even though it costs red mana to play it. When you cast a spell, you create 3/1 colorless Eldrazi spawns with sacrifice this creature, add colorless mana. So it's actually moving away from scions and moving back to spawns. So I wonder if they thought that maybe just like it making 1/1s would be too good. And I don't know if necessarily, we'll see as kind of the set comes out, that any of these other creatures that make, these Eldrazi creature tokens if they're going to be 0/1s or 1/1s. But continuing even further, for 1 and a colorless mana, you sacrifice an Eldrazi, and Spawn Gang Commander deals 2 damage to any target. This is just straight up like the Eldrazi version of Siege Gang Commander. Nothing too crazy. Definitely not something that is going to, I think, see any serious play in Modern. But, it is a pretty cool card and a pretty neat throwback, and for some older players and stuff, that this is going to be a card that you can kind of write, like you can make that direct correlation to this is a Siege Gang Commander, but like an Eldrazi Siege Gang Commander, which is pretty sweet. And of course, like getting to sacrifice just any Eldrazi, you can end up getting some of the shuffle effects from some of the bigger ones. You end up like annihilating their board, being able to shuffle it back and be able to cast it again later, things like that. Obviously not the most ideal, but kind of funny thinking that this little Eldrazi goblin is throwing like an Emrakul at your opponent's face for only 2 damage, and then just having it shuffle back into your deck to be able to be found later. The official debut of Modern Horizons 3 will be May 21st. You can join and relive the rise and defeat of the Eldrazi with Magic Story, including featuring preview cards beginning May 13th. Random surprises will happen, randomly, which then leads us to Kappa Cannoneer, which says, oh no, artifact decks are going to be busted. So Kappa Cannoneer is this card that was printed, I believe it was in a Commander set, and it was a really, really good card in Legacy for a while. And I don't know if necessary. I mean, it does see some play. It is kind of like a Legacy All-Star. But Kappa Cannoneer, 5 generic and a blue for a 4/4 artifact creature Turtle Warrior that has Improvise. So your artifacts can help you cast a spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1. So you're able to tap like 5 artifacts and a blue mana to play Kappa Cannoneer, just as an example. Has Ward 4, which we've seen like in the Standard Pro Tour. Ward 1 was pretty annoying to deal with, and just having a Ward ability that is not, that is contingent on you paying mana is very annoying to deal with. So Kappa Cannoneer is definitely kind of a little bit harder, especially since even like some of the 1 mana removal that's in the format, you're still going to need to pay 4 mana to end up getting rid of it. So whenever Kappa Cannoneer or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Kappa Cannoneer, and it can't be blocked this turn. So even when it enters the battlefield, it says it's a 6 mana 4/4. It ends up being a 6 mana 5/5 with its trigger and everything. So it's only a 4/4 for just a small tiny bit of time. We know that this kind of synergizes well with Simulacrum Synthesizer, being an artifact spell that it ends up being 3 or greater that you're going to be able to make construct tokens for. Kind of works a little against Kappa Cannoneer because it's still only going to be a 5/5. You're going to end up making the construct or multiple constructs after it comes into play. But this is kind of like the perfect card to just kind of start it off, where you play it and ends up getting a counter, and then you start playing like your Frogmites, your Mirror Enforcers, Sojourner's Companions, Thought Monitors, things like that, and then you end up just getting to grow this thing so big. And then you have another turn where you just play like a random artifact, where if you play like a Shadow Spear and the Cannoneer already has like 10, 11, 12, 13 counters on it, it's going to be a 14/14 unblockable that is just going to end up gaining you a ton of life. It's a crazy card. Like, it can definitely snowball. I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but definitely has a lot going in its favor with kind of the affinity deck on the rise. Ward being a very annoying mechanic to deal with, especially having Ward 4 and not even like Ward pay 4 life. So just overall, like an annoying card to have to deal with, especially if Affinity is going to kind of keep seeing an uptick in play. This kind of slots in well because it synergizes well with all the other things that it has going on. And, just ends up being a big unblockable threat while you gum up the ground with a bunch of construct tokens. Which brings us to Meltdown, which is probably the perfect answer to a deck like this, or to Affinity, where it's X and red sorcery. You destroy each artifact with mana value X or less. Typically, we would see cards like this, destroy only X cost cards. But Meltdown is an older card. I believe this is like Urza Saga block, or Urza block stuff, whatever. There was a lot of broken stuff back then. But Meltdown, getting extra less. You can pay red, it's going to deal with all the construct tokens, and then you go, 1, 2, and ends up getting a lot more things. So a lot more bang for your buck. Definitely going to be a sideboard staple, again, if Affinity starts to kind of creep up. The big thing is going to be getting rid of like the construct tokens and, potentially getting up to 3 and dealing with like synthesizer as well to kind of like take away the majority of the engine of what's going on. Like the format, I would say, isn't so fast that you couldn't eventually just get up to enough to like deal with like a Kappa Cannoneer or even like a Mirror Enforcer, Frogmite, things like that. But definitely getting to play this for 0, or for 1 red mana is going to be pretty huge in those decks that are just trying to, again, kind of gum up the ground. Even getting to do it for 1 to hit Shadow Spear, things like that is just, this is going to be good. And you get around Ward and things like that as well by getting to destroy each instead of like a target or targets, what have you, which is really neat. And you kind of get this retro border as well. So pretty cool overall. We go even further, but we're not all monsters. Well, Bob from accounting might be, but generally we're fans just like you. Ask your local longtime player if you're not familiar with Bob from accounting. So we're going to leave you with some cool cards from both Modern Horizons 3 and Modern Horizons 3 Commander sets, which I'm not going to look at the Commander cards because I don't typically, I don't play that format, but it is what it is. So we have Felia Exuberant Shepherd, which is a 2-mana 2/2 flash legendary creature dog. Whenever Felia Exuberant Shepherd attacks, exile up to 1 other target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it enters under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Felia. So, really neat. Kind of sucks you have to attack with it, but if your opponent plays a 2-drop, you end up flashing this on their turn, and then you get to attack and then exile a non-land permanent, so you can exile some cool like 1-mana things to kind of like get some extra value. You're going to end up growing Felia up to a 3/3, and then you're going to be able to get probably some decent ETBs and things like that as well. So pretty neat card overall. Will it see a lot of modern play? I'm sure people are going to try, but this card is really neat, and there is some things that you can do with this that are going to be very powerful. That's just kind of what you can do on like turn 2 going to turn 3. But or you can even like play a 3-drop attack with this and then kind of like flicker it back to end up getting some additional value as well. So something to think about. It's a really neat card. I don't know if it's necessarily playable, but it will be pretty sweet to kind of get to experiment and play with a card like this. Then we have like the full art treatment, which is actually like really beautiful. I love that. Another card, Null Drifter, which is a callback to Mole Drifter. So it is a 7-mana 4/4 flying. When you cast the spell, draw 2 cards. It has Annihilator 1, and it has the Evoke mechanic. And thankfully, this isn't just exiling cards. It is 2 and a blue to evoke it, which is the same thing as Mole Drifter's evoke cost. Just now, when you cast the spell, you get to draw 2 cards. There's no funny business on getting to blink it and then getting to draw additional cards, which is kind of like a fix for something like Mole Drifter. But even getting to kind of blink this, 4 mana for a 4/4 that drew you 2 cards, has flying Annihilator 1, is still pretty good. I'm sure for a lot of people, like just off the nostalgia alone, and of course the potential like brokenness of getting to kind of have a 4/4 flyer with Annihilator 1, people are going to try to play this card when it comes out. Is it good? I don't know if for a fact that it is good, but it is definitely going to be very nostalgic, and it's going to be a lot of fun to play this thing and just get to draw 2 cards off of it. That's probably going to be fine, especially if there is a way for somebody to keep around the 4/4 body with the Annihilator 1 too. So pretty cool. The old border as well is really neat too. Here we have Hairest Erupting Nullkite, 9 mana 6/6 with Emerge 6 and 2 red. So you can sacrifice a creature and paying the emerge cost reduced by that creature's mana value. So if you have a 6-cost card, you can end up paying 2 red for Airghast. So when you cast a spell, you may exile your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. It is a flyer, and each creature spell you cast has a merge. The emerge is equal to its mana cost. So if you have like another Hairghast Nullkite, you can sacrifice it to pay its own emerge each creature spell. So you can just sacrifice this air gas to end up playing another one and getting to do kind of the same thing, which, isn't necessarily like the most broken thing. You're not discarding the cards, you're having to exile them, so it's a little bit harder to get them back, as there's like a few cards in Magic's history that lets you do that. But it's still like really neat. Again, I don't know how powerful this could be. Again, like Affinity is something that immediately jumps to my mind because you get to play like some of these cheap spells for free. Not an artifact, but it does kind of refuel your hand after you kind of, dump it onto the board. So could be pretty sweet. Probably on the less playable side, but I definitely kind of see where this is like coming from, where this can be, a very powerful effect. Getting also the full art treatment, which is pretty nice as well. Kudo, King Among Bears. Other creatures you control have base power 2/2 and are bears in addition to the other types. For a green and a white 2/2 legendary bear. It just makes everything bears, and that's pretty sweet. There's some bear synergy to kind of go around, but this is pretty cool. Like I like this card. Will it see modern play? I'm sure someone's gonna try. Now there's like a decent amount of bear support from like the other Modern Horizon sets. There could be something decent here, especially just getting to change all other creatures' base power and toughness to 2/2s, and having something like Ayula, which is like can put counters on like your bears and things like that. You can just easily outgrow your opponent's stuff and just basically play Protect the King with something like Kudo. It actually gets kind of like this foil etched border. It gets an old border and of course full art, which like the full art is not really doing anything for me. Null Elemental Blast, call back to red and blue Elemental Blast. It counters target multicolored spell and destroy target multicolored permanent. Same thing straight up. Potentially could definitely see some play in the format. The fact that it costs colorless mana is definitely where like the restriction is going to lie, more so than actually getting the effect on the card. So we'll kind of see how it goes, but this kind of gives some decks an ability to fight against the leyline stuff, or even just like straight up destroy creatures based on, as long as they don't have Scion in play. So pretty cool stuff. Nice callback. Nethergoyf, callback to Tarmogoyf, and it has Escape. We went over this card before, and Nethergoyf I think could potentially see play in the format, just being a little bit cheaper and having that ability to end up being brought back from the graveyard and be a little bit more annoying. Like I'm sure there's a way to kind of keep the engine going to where Nethergoyf is going to be like a 3/4 or 4/5 for a lot of the time, or even bigger as well. You don't even really need to escape it as well. Like this is just kind of like a threat that doesn't necessarily die, and you can do it kind of like in the late game, which is really neat. Silen Safekeeper, a reprint of a card from like an older set. I believe that's I'm not even confident on like what that set symbol is. 1 green mana for a 1/1. Sacrifice a land. Target creature you control gains Shroud until end of turn. So believe that there's like very few synergies that care about sacking lands and putting them into your graveyard. But Silen Safekeeper is like a way that in some of the reanimator decks that you're able to kind of play it and protect some of your big reanimated threats to make it a little bit harder for your opponent to deal with. So that's really neat. Orum's Chant is essentially a silence, but you can also stop your creatures can't attack this turn as well. Getting a sweet reprint from Planeshift, nice full art to go with it as well. Winter Moon, a callback to Winter Orb. Players can't untap more than one non-basic land during their untap step. So a little bit of a fixed version of it, especially like in a format where there is a lot of non-basic lands. Winter Moon is going to be super annoying. I could definitely see this being some kind of hate piece for like the 4 and 5 color decks going forward. And then the rest are like a lot of the commander stuff, which again, I'm not really a fan of, but it is what it is. But that is so far what we've seen from Modern Horizons. Necro Dominance not being a card that is like officially spoiled or officially confirmed kind of sucks, because that was a card I was pretty excited for. It was just kind of being like a fixed version of Necropotence. But aside from that, pretty happy with all the other cards. I'm really excited for cards like Nethergoyf, and even the bears like kind of cool. Of course, getting to see kind of the impact that we'll see on like these free counter spells. Chthonian Nightmare is another one as well that I would be super excited and hyped to kind of play with, for the fact of there's just a million different ways to kill off creatures, even like this with like something like Gravecrawler. You can end up just like playing the Gravecrawler back from your graveyard, and then just constantly, usually have kind of a sack outlet for Nightmare to be able to get something back and kind of net energy until you end up getting something a lot bigger. But, let me know in the comments down below what card you're most excited for in Modern Horizons 3, or what you're excited for the most in Modern Horizons 3, whether it's the Commander stuff, the actual Modern stuff, I'll take it. I love talking about this stuff. And be sure to stay tuned into the channel as we kind of post more and kind of give some individual thoughts and opinions on some of the other cards going forward that end up getting spoiled from the set, as we get into the month of May. So that's going to be this video. Hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.